Good morning, everybody, and welcome. My clock reads 9 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. We're looking forward to some really fantastic conversation today. We've got a couple of pieces on the agenda that we're really excited about, and we're looking forward to having good conversation and really being able to do some great work together today. I will kick us off. I hope you're all enjoying the Friday of your daylight savings week. I will say that I'm happy that these meetings are on Friday and not on Monday, as I am a lot more cheery now than I was at 9 o'clock on Monday morning. Thanks to all of you for serving Kansas kids and families in this role. We really appreciate it. Obviously, today is a remote meeting and we're old hats at this by now. We know that if folks are listening on the YouTube channel and are looking for our agenda or other meeting materials, they can visit kschildrenscabinet.org and click the About tab and select Early Childhood Recommendations panel, and then select Meetings to find all of that information. Participants, we will not be using the chat function since that's not available to the public on YouTube. So you can just use that to communicate to the host. And if there are any motions, those will be clearly stated before the committee votes. We'll also, I'm Amanda Peterson, we will try to remember to say our names when we start talking so that we can identify ourselves. So with that, today's agenda we sent out last week. And you can see it here on our screen. After our regular business at the start of the meeting, we will have a conversation about breastfeeding in Kansas. Thanks, Brenda Bandy, for joining us today. We will continue to reflect on COVID-19 and the Kansas response to the pandemic. We will take a break at 10:05, regardless of where we're at in the agenda, so that we can get up and stretch. And then we will have conversation about unheard voices in the Our Tomorrow's Story Bank. And then at the end of our meeting, we'll have our regular pieces, which includes a Bright Spots opportunity for panel members to share out information with other members. So if this looks good to everybody, and if we don't have any questions, if somebody could please make a motion to approve the agenda, that would be fantastic.
I'll make a motion to approve. This
Awesome.
is Gail Kozad.
Thank you, Gail. Do we have a second?
It's Cornelia Stevens, I second.
Thank you, Cornelia. Everybody in favor, either raise your hand, give me a thumbs up, or give me a thumbs up emoji. That looks like a majority vote to me. Go team. And then we also sent out the February 19th meeting minutes after the previous meeting. Did we get a chance to read and review those minutes? Do we have any questions or proposed edits? Not seeing any. I would love a motion to approve those minutes.
This is Amy. Make a motion to approve the minutes.
Amy, go for it. Reva, were you about to second?
Yes, I will second that.
Thank you, Reva. Same deal, thumbs up emoji. Hooray, go team. We have approved February 19th, 2021 meeting minutes. Debbie, I don't believe that we had anybody submit comments for the Kansans Open Forum. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Fantastic. So as a reminder for any folks who are listening, any Kansan can email Debbie up until the Thursday before our meetings to share either written comments or sign up to share verbal comments with the panel during the portion of the meeting. Is just one more opportunity to be able to give feedback and shape our early childhood system. People can also visit the Kansas Children's Cabinet website and go to kschildrenscabinet.org/share. There's a really nice, easy portal where you can type in your comments if you're not quite sure where in the Kansas early childhood system they should go. So a couple of opportunities for folks to share feedback if they're not a member of a formal group. With that, I'll turn it over to Debbie to talk us through our follow-up from previous meetings.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning to those on the panel with us and everyone else who is out there listening throughout Kansas. First item on our follow-up will be a report from the Strategies for Engaging Providers work group. And I am going to turn that over to Emily Barnes, who is part of that work group. And she's got information from our last meeting on February 22nd. Emily?
Thank you. So yes, I'm Emily Barnes, provider in Olathe, and have participated in the Engaging Providers work group that we created after the January meeting. And so at the end of February was our last meeting. And in the process, we had come into that meeting kind of with the task of figuring out ways to reach out to the providers within our own networks, everybody in there in the group, to kind of ask, what do you want from the engaging providers group? What would you hope to have it look like? Things of that nature. And that actually led to 2 providers deciding to join in on the meeting. One was very experienced in the state of Kansas, and another was new to the state of Kansas, but also had a very wide range of experiences. Although new to Kansas, was not new to family child care in and of itself. And so we opened up conversation, with introductions and, making sure that everybody on the panel understood the purpose. And then really that kind of led into some pretty good conversation concerning, what does engagement mean? Are we asking the right questions? We had, some dialogue around that, and, to make sure, when we say we're engaging providers, what do we actually mean by that? And what is that doing for our organizations? And also, what is that doing for the providers? And then the question had been brought up of, are we asking it in the right way? Are we going through the right mechanisms? And B, are we asking in a way that, if we ask the question of, well, what do you want? Does that actually lead to an inviting conversation? Or do we need to look at how are we wording it, and what would be a way that facilitates the conversation more strongly and with more participants? Feedback that we did get was that the alphabet soup of all the acronyms of the different organizations is difficult, even for providers who have worked as a provider in Kansas for a long time. It's confusing to keep straight who is who and how they're connected. And so we had talked kind of about, a web, is there the ability to pull some of that information together, so that way then people can understand how KDHE is related to DCF, which, was related to the CCDBG. So that way, when all these alphabet acronyms are being tossed around, they understand Department of Health and Environment, Department of Children and Family, Child Care Block Grant. And so that way then, kind of getting to the heart of the fact that part of engagement, like we do with this meeting, making sure that our language is able to be understood by anybody listening, making sure that the information that we're giving out, people understand where the pathway is and how it's connected, things of that nature. Then some other feedback that I got when I was reaching out, trying to understand what other providers were needing, is it's sometimes feeling like they're too new to the situation, and that they don't necessarily know what is needed, or they don't know where they fit in being able to use their voice. And so making sure that part of the engagement is helping providers understand that regardless of where they are in their experience, feedback is helpful, and that, if the intent is to create a stronger system that benefits providers and families and children, then feedback, constructive feedback is helpful and useful. Then some of the other feedback I was able to glean pertained to training for more experienced providers, making sure that there are new topics, addressing burnout, that, many providers are feeling provider fatigue and burnout, and how to navigate through that. And so finding ways to engage with them to help in those ways. And then we also were able, with one of the people who was in the meeting, we were able to talk about their experience outside of Kansas in the different states where they have lived and worked as a licensed provider. Their experience was different. It it was Department of Defense licensing. And so, but, still benefited from, the state, support programs that exist. And so kind of being able to talk about which systems supported the provider in this and that way, and, things that that person saw. And then, sorry, looking back at my notes. And so then that led into kind of talking about what worked in her experience outside of Kansas. Is then we also kind of led back into what key players do we need to consider involving in the engaging providers work group. That we have a lot of people who are very interested in making sure that there is successful communication, but are we reaching out to all the entities, licensing, things of that nature? We had some CCR in our representation, but making sure that we've got the right people, so that way then we've got the information going out in an effective manner. And so then one of the ideas that also got brought up was the concept of bringing a panel of providers who felt comfortable, speaking to their experience maybe to this panel to discuss, how to go forward, things, ideas, things of that nature. And I walked out of the meeting feeling like it was a positive, constructive conversation with, the goal setting of just making sure to, create supports and keep the hard work going. Debbie, was there anything else that I missed?
I don't think so. And I'm really glad that you were able to share that out. From the perspective as a home provider, as well as a panel member, and then, having those connections to other providers. So our next steps are to schedule another meeting coming up soon, and then we will just continue this work and identifying ways that we can engage those providers.
And
So
Debbie
thank
and
you,
Emily, I love that update. I'm wondering if any panel members have any questions or comments or reactions, because there were a lot of great pieces to dig into there. One piece that really struck me, Emily, that first piece you were talking about, it can be easy to get lost in the alphabet soup of acronyms and who's responsible for what. And it can be really overwhelming to figure out how all the pieces fit together. I wonder if anybody has seen any tools before to help make the early childhood system a little bit more understandable in Kansas, or if anybody has any strategies that they use when they talk about something like a particular funding stream to help make all of the stuff that can seem really kind of abstract and technical feel a little more manageable and like something you can wrap your arms around and have a conversation about.
Amanda, this is Amy Gottschammer. I don't have a specific answer for you, except to say that I know in years past I had asked for that kind of information myself, and in particular about, where do funding streams come from for particular projects, and most of the responses I got were along the lines of, well, oftentimes these things get funded by several different buckets, and and those buckets may be covering other things, and it's so intertwined that it gets very confusing to follow a straight path.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Sarah.
Sarah Rivers, a parent. I work in healthcare, and one of the things we do with our acronyms for documenting is we just have a list that says, this means this, this means this. I don't know if something like that would be helpful or if it already exists, just as a resource for those providers to be able to access. It wouldn't necessarily be something, they need to study, but, oh, hey, somebody mentioned that. I could at least go back to that list and get an idea of what that might have meant.
That's a great call, Sarah. I think that our state interagency coordinating council, and I know we've got a couple of members on here. I think they have something like that might be a good starting point, or something that we might be able to take a look at.
Well, and I know, Amanda, one of the other comments that was made was maybe having some kind of a visual map if you will. Like Emily said, how the different state agencies, where they fit in, the different organizations, and, when providers, sorry, when providers need that information. And I don't know if that's out there.
When the idea was discussed, what I would envision was kind of like a web, like I glibly called it a family tree, but, more like a web where, you could have KDHE connect down to, DCF and, things like that could show how they connect, where does Kansas Children's Cabinet relate into connection to these entities and, and things like that, to show kind of the webbing effect of the interaction and the collaboration.
I wonder if there could be sorry, this is Amy Gottchammer again. I wonder if there could be an approach that would sort of be answers to frequently asked questions. Like, for example, where can my families get tuition support? And then under that, it might be, might be DCF, but it might also be locally. And maybe this is a document that needs to be a little bit, manageable at the local level, but, it could also be local agencies that provide through grant work of their own tuition subsidies to families.
Cassandra, go ahead.
As part of the Family Advisory Council for KDHE, we have a list of acronyms that we've developed. They're kind of more specific to special healthcare needs, but it's a start that we could share. I'm sure that would, kind of give us a start of some acronyms.
Yeah, Cassandra, I think that if you have access to that, if you could send it to Debbie, that would be fantastic.
Okay, I will.
This is Kelly Mark. It almost feels like to me what would be helpful would be like a hierarchy where you could have the governor at the top and then the cabinet agencies, and really show how that organization fits all together all the way down to the local child care provider. That way they can see what goes up and we can see what goes down. Also with the frequently asked questions and the glossary of acronyms would be helpful in that same kind of visual.
Kelly, I think that's where I was thinking too, is a pillar of support. So I think I've seen it with Kansas Strong. They start with, it almost looks like the Capitol building, and then the top of the roof has something, I can't remember exactly, but then each pillar has a department that kind of feeds into that. And then it has at the bottom, like you're saying, the child care provider and the businesses and stuff like that. So almost like a pillar of support. I'll try to find it and send it to Debbie.
Awesome. Thanks, Christy. Any other questions or comments on this piece?
Well, and Amanda, just one more thing. I know SICC has one as an acronym list. So I can try to take a look at that and see if that's, if that's going to be helpful at all, and maybe
Perfect.
combine a lot of these lists.
Well, thanks. It's exciting to hear that this work is underway, and we know that if people want to get involved in it, that they can contact Debbie so that they can join this work group and join this work. So Debbie, I think I'll turn it back to you for the next speaker.
Just to recap from February meeting, we had the discussions for CCDF, another acronym, the Child Care Development Fund for, I'm sorry, Amanda, could you take over? I just have this cough.
Absolutely. Yeah, grab some water, Debbie.
All right.
So thanks everybody for a really fantastic conversation in February. I know that our partners at the Department for Children and Families really appreciated just the fantastic conversation, and that many of you also helped get the word out so that other Kansans could join other public input sessions. So we have this recap. We approved many of these pieces that we discussed. That was included in our meeting minutes. And I know that the team at the Department for Children and Families is taking all of that information and synthesizing it and moving it forward towards the next phase in the plan process for those federal childcare funds that come into the state of Kansas. So I know that all of you are signed up for the All In for Kansas Kids weekly email updates. And if folks are listening on YouTube and want to get signed up for those, they can visit the Kansas Children's Cabinet and Trust Fund website to do that. And I'm sure that those emails will be a great place to look for future opportunities to provide feedback on the state plan when it reaches the public comment phase, the next phase in the process. So I was really appreciative that we had this panel here as a group of stakeholders who are already in the mindset of sharing feedback on the early childhood system. I really appreciate all of you contributing to a fantastic conversation. And I know that it is really valuable to have that feedback as we move forward and continue that work. So now I will turn it over to Brenda Bandy to have some conversation with us. I know that we have shared out the pre-meeting recording so that you could see the webinar from, gosh, Brenda, it was about 3 weeks ago now when you were able to put together just a rockstar panel for the All In for Kansas Kids weekly webinar. So I'll turn it over to you. I've got the slides here, so I'll
Thank you.
Great. Hold on.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you to the panel for allowing some additional time to talk about this conversation that does feel like this has been going on for quite some time. I think it actually started back in August when we presented to the weekly systems building webinar about the toolkit that we launched. And then you're right, on February 24th, we did put together a rockstar panel, and many of you on this on that panel are a part of this recommendations panel. So this feels like a continuation of a conversation that's been going on for a long time. The Kansas Breastfeeding Coalition has been a part of the early childhood strategic planning part, which is where we did a lot of work around the needs assessment and getting stories shared and figuring out how infant feeding and breastfeeding fits into the continuum of early childhood. You probably have heard me mention that breastfeeding is part of the continuum, but it's also very foundational to the continuum of early childhood. And I know the many of you on the call here that I do know really do understand that deep connection between if breastfeeding goes well and the child is breastfed, that everything else seems to fall into place really well. So next slide. I just want to let you know that in Kansas, breastfeeding really is the norm. We have, according to the PRAMS data, 90% of families do some breastfeeding from the very beginning. So this is really I think evidence that this is what families in Kansas want to do. They want to breastfeed. We're no longer in a position of having to convince people that they should breastfeed. It's like people understand that that is what they want to do. So what we're faced with now is trying to support this behavior in a culture, in a system that often is not in alignment with that behavior, and that oftentimes puts up barriers, even unintentional barriers to breastfeeding. So our organization, the Kansas Breastfeeding Coalition, is really about removing those barriers across systems wherever they exist. And we started with employers way back in 2008. And we recognized that, working with employers is one thing, but if the childcare provider isn't supportive or doesn't understand how to handle breastfeeding and breast milk, that's an integral part of success. And I'm really happy that all of the childcare people that I have met understand the role of childcare. This nice ecosystem of who influences families really helps to illustrate how close the childcare providers are to the mother and family when it comes to influence over her breastfeeding success. They're the people that she sees every day. She sees her childcare provider, as you know, more often than her physician, more often sometimes than her own family members. So they quickly actually move into that inner circle of the red of friends and family for childcare providers. So we understand that the childcare provider really needs to have a deep understanding of how to support breastfeeding, not to convince a family to breastfeed, because chances are 9 out of 10 times that a family is going to probably enter care, or at least during pregnancy have the intention to breastfeed. So next slide. So there was an interesting study, though, that came out. Actually, I just saw it a few days, last week, I think, is when the day before I sent the slides in. And this was a study out of Florida where they did focus group interviews with child care administrators of large centers. Now, it was a sample of 28 administrators. It was in Tampa, Florida. I believe it was Tampa, Florida. And the outcome of this, when I shared it with our child care section, it was surprising, because we feel like in Kansas, we're probably doing a little bit better. But what they found was that everybody understood breast is best. Breastfeeding is what we need to do. But how does it actually work in the childcare setting? And these were some of the common themes, is that the assumption is that babies are going to be formula fed. So the system is often set up to support formula feeding, where breastfeeding is seen as something we have to get additional training for, or we've got to figure that out, or gosh, I'm really not sure, which leads to maybe not being as supportive as we could be. There's also still concerns about public breastfeeding. It's like, yeah, we support breastfeeding, but we just don't want to see it. It's like, can she do that over there? Can she do that in her car? Can she, it's okay as long as they don't have to see it kind of mentality. And just that uncomfortableness with even handling breast milk. And we've done a lot of work in trying to dispel some of those myths, but there's still very deeply held beliefs, especially those that may have been in the field for a while, about having to use gloves when handling breast milk, those kinds of things. So this really, to me, highlights what we've been doing in Kansas with your support for 8+ years. We've educated over 4,600 childcare providers with our course that we've been doing. We have a childcare section that's been working on this. And yet, have we really addressed the cultural, deeply held beliefs that individuals have around breastfeeding? And that's where I'm excited about this conversation with you all as the panel, because I really want to shift from just talking to you to listening to you. I want to hear and brainstorm some ideas about how we can make this cultural shift in the early child care field to make breastfeeding the norm rather than formula feeding the norm, where that becomes the baseline for how we feed infants, period. So next slide. So the next part of this is information about how are we doing in Kansas to make this cultural shift. So we took the strategic plan, the early childhood strategic plan, looked at every single one of the goals. And we even, if you looked at the alignment document, you'll see that there's even greater detail, but I just tried to summarize for the sake of the slides. How do we align breastfeeding work with the child care, with the early childhood strategic plan? And you can see state level coordination. Well, that's what we're doing right now. We are having a state level conversation, and we've been doing this for a while. That's how I've met a lot of you people, but we have been talking about our childcare section, which is our chair is Chris Nicholson. If you know Chris with Childcare Aware, you know that she has a very deep understanding of this. We have our webpage, which I hope you all took the bonus homework and checked out our childcare page. You can see all the resources we've developed. And we have 30 some local breastfeeding coalitions that are doing this work on the local level. And when I put training for the childcare health consultants, that's just the latest example of training that we've done. But like Lori shared on the webinar, we've trained the surveyors. We've trained the infant toddler specialists at Casito. We've done trainings for childcare aware staff. So this is just the latest example of state level training. On the local level, we do have those local coalitions, and we have that resource directory to help local childcare providers find their breastfeeding resources. Family knowledge and choice, that's really what the KBC has been doing in partnership with many of your organizations as well. And our coalition being a part of WIC and KDHE really helps to build on that. Next slide, Amanda. Thanks. And the next part is about that private sector collaboration. I just want to point out that we started working with employers, and we recognize that childcare providers are small businesses, right? Whether they're centers or home-based, they're running small businesses. So many of the tools that we've created for businesses apply to childcare providers. How do they support their own employees? As well as how do we get childcare providers to partner with businesses as well? We have a really robust relationship with businesses. capacity and workforce training, the quality improvements. I feel like we talked about that a lot in the webinar on the 24th. So I don't want to belabor all of those resources that we have. So Amanda, next slide. I did want to point out the alignment with the recommendations that are already out on a national level. I'm sure that many of these things are not new to you, but look at the robust list of standards in Caring for Our Children that specifically call out breastfeeding. So this is not anything new. It is really interwoven throughout the recommendations for how we should be behaving around supporting breastfeeding in the child care center. Next slide. We also have the Head Start National Performance Standards, which again align with those early childhood, the Caring for Our Children standards around the same sort of thing. What are we doing? And if we think about breastfeeding in the child care center, I've come to think of it in two strands. There's the individual support of how do we help this mom to breastfeed, right? And childcare providers, we don't expect them to be the expert. We just want them to connect with the local experts. But then there's the second prong around the technical, how do we handle breast milk in the childcare center, and how the technical piece. And that's really what the standards are getting to, is technically, how do we handle the breastfed infant in care? And then the second piece is the support piece, that family engagement, family knowledge, connecting to resources. Both of those things need to happen simultaneously. And I think whatever comes out of the recommendations panel should touch on both of those. That's what we've been trying to do in our work. Next slide. So now we're going to shift to me not talking and to hear from you all, because I understand from talking to Amanda and Debbie that you as a panel really want to work, right? You don't want to just listen to information. So this is your chance to roll up your sleeves and just share and do some brainstorming on what can we do in Kansas to achieve this cultural shift to embedding infant feeding practices that are supportive of breastfeeding. So we thought that it's probably best to get started with your own personal views about breastfeeding, whether it was you as a mom or a family member, a neighbor, someone that you maybe recently knew that has gone through the experience of breastfeeding. And we know that sometimes that can be a bumpy road and sometimes it can be a really smooth road. So we thought that we could start with thinking about that. Try to get an experience in your head. Now, what worked well and what could have gone better? Specifically as it relates to care, as you were looking for care maybe with that infant, and we can open it up and unmute or throw in the chat box. I think we're not doing the chat box because it's without open meetings thing. So unmute and please share how that experience could have been better with support. Where could that support have come from?
Well, I have a couple that I'll share just to start the conversation, if that's okay. This is Kelly Mark. Sorry for not introducing myself. The first was a personal experience. Well, they're both personal experiences for me. But the first was kind of like what Brenda already alluded to, breastfeeding in public. I was in church and my son was screaming and needed to be fed. And I had a cover because I was not comfortable breastfeeding without a cover. But even with a cover, like there's no lactation room. The lobby is very small. The bathroom is very small and nobody wants to go sit on the toilet when they're breastfeeding. But like that was the only option. So I just breastfed in the pew with my cover, but it was very uncomfortable because you can feel all those people looking at you. So I think a lactation room would have helped, yeah. Or a child room. You know, I've been in churches that even had a child room where you could take your children when they were upset. This is a very old traditional church, so none of that existed, but that would have been very helpful. My other experience was really great. I really, really depended on the Stormont Vale breastfeeding clinic after my son was born. They were my lifeline. I had a place to go every Tuesday to get him weighed, to make sure I was breastfeeding correctly. I had very high anxiety after he was born, and that really helped me to have those other moms around me, have that place I could go. But I was not referred there. I found that just because that was the hospital delivered at. My OB never talked to me about breastfeeding, whether I wanted to breastfeed. I didn't have any prenatal education. I mean, my kids are old, so this was, culture has changed a bit since then, but I just found it. Luckily, I found that resource that I needed. The one thing I wish that they would have done for me at that clinic was I wish they would have screened me for postpartum depression. I'm a real proponent of screening for postpartum depression happening in breastfeeding clinics because they see moms so soon after birth. I eventually did go to my primary physician and get diagnosed with postpartum depression and got medication, but I was scared to take the medication because I was breastfeeding. So some support there on whether I could take it and how to take it and that it wouldn't harm my baby probably would have helped a lot.
Wow, Kelly, thank you so much for sharing those different perspectives. That is, and I'm taking notes here. That is great. What opportunities you've illustrated and in the integration of so many different areas, right? Yeah, thank you.
This is Jennifer Edema. I will also kind of piggyback on what Kelly said. When I was thinking about my own personal experience, I was actually glad to hear you say, Kelly, that your OB had never talked to you about breastfeeding. Neither did mine. And so my first experience with it was, in the hospital with the lactation consultants, and it was not going well. And so I think when I think about this topic, I think about how do we manage expectations for what this is going to look like? Because I guess I just felt like it should just come so easily. It should just happen. And I think while I found the lactation support very helpful, I do remember one time calling because my child was just feeding every 30 minutes. I mean, I think I'd had a night where I had not left the couch. And I just remember the other person on the end of the phone saying, well, that's called cluster feeding and that's just what they do. And it was kind of like, oh, you should just deal with it. And there was no additional follow-up questions or strategies on how to cope with that. Right. And I was very frustrated. I think the other I had a lot of support. I had a supportive workplace. I had an office where I could pump. So I was very fortunate. I think the other moment that I remember that could have been improved with support was related to my childcare provider. I remember at one day getting a call at work from them and them saying, well, we don't have any more milk. And I think they were panicked because they knew that my child was hungry. But to me, it really did make me question, is this the right choice? Should I be giving her formula? Should I move to that now if I can't provide enough? So I think the conversation could have gone maybe a little differently. It threw me into a panic as the mother, but I also understand their perspective as the provider.
Wow, Jennifer, thank you for sharing those different perspectives. And I think what I heard too, in addition to, that how emotional it is, breastfeeding is a very emotional experience, is the importance of communication skills. Had either of those conversations gone differently about, oh, just deal with that cluster feeding thing, that's just what happens, followed by some compassion and some strategies. And then with the childcare provider, that communication skills to say, and we're running low on milk, but we know what to do. We've got this infant feeding plan, right? And we're going to move to the next level. So that's some reassurance. So I think communication skills, and that goes back to that two-prong approach, right? There's the technical piece. Yeah, we know what to do with this bottle of breast milk and how to store it and safely handle it. But the communication and the support and the engagement and how do we talk to families about it is just so important. Thank you.
Linda, it's Christy Smith. I want to talk a little bit about the culture piece. So my mom and I are very, very close. And one of the things that was a huge influence on my experience was that my mother never breastfed. So my mother was raised in that generation that you took a pill and you dried up and there you go. So when I had almost 18 years ago, it's crazy to even think about it, I already had the mindset going into, is it right or wrong? Like I turned out okay because my mom didn't do it, right? So I think I'm pretty okay. And then I had challenges in the hospital. And then the nurse even said, maybe your body just isn't made to produce milk. And until really my work with you, I didn't realize, like, I thought that was a thing. Like, I thought, like, okay, there's just some women out there that just don't produce milk, right? Until I started my journey years ago with you on this breastfeeding world. But I think for me, hearing my mom, like, had that experience, a nurse confirming it's probably just you. Here is your pump machine because your baby clearly doesn't like to latch to you. And it was all just boom, boom, boom. And then to see the production and know from my childcare experience, all the formula fed babies and the amount of their bottles, and not having the knowledge of the difference of what you would produce as a mom versus what is from a formula, I think just literally got me to the place of, man, this is wrong. Like to Jennifer's point, I didn't have the support that said, you're doing good. Like this is, keep it up. It was, nope, I think we're done. And so stopped at a very early age with Ethan. So culture is a big piece of how your mindset comes into play with breastfeeding too.
Absolutely. Thank you, Christy. And those words that we use and the reference points that we give, those bottles of formula, good point. Thank you, Christy. I appreciate that and your perspective. Yeah. Sarah, I think you had
So I have several different perspectives. I was able to breastfeed all three of my girls and had what I felt like to be overall good support, although I did have to seek out the resources that I needed. So I gave birth at the birth care center in Wichita at Wesley, and they were able to pull in lactation consultants. And they asked if I wanted one to come in. So I was able to access that resource and then was able to follow up with one of those. With my first, my second actually struggled to nurse. And so I'd done a lot of research. I have a feeding background, so I was able to kind of support her, but to actually get into the breastfeeding clinic to get somebody who had some extra experience took more because I had to find childcare for my older child. So I think that's a factor for some families is I now have an extra kid to care for, and I don't know that I can actually get in to get the support that's available. My third child has Down syndrome. And so I'd done the research, knew that that was a possibility, but I can tell you that not a lot of people were like, yeah, that's probably not going to happen. I was fortunate in that the lactation consultant that came over to see us, and in the time that we were in the hospital was supportive and had some strategies that she was able to offer. And then we worked on it at home, and she was a successful nurser and did so for 16 months. So I feel really good about those experiences. On the flip side of that, I've also supported a lot of moms who wanted to continue to breastfeed, but their kids were struggling nursing too. So I have a little bit of personal experience to be able to pull into that when I support those moms. But they'd sought out community resources, and those, even the lactation consultants didn't have a clue what to do with these kids. And I think it was just because they were unique situations, right? Like they had special needs or they had underlying things and nobody caught them. Or my most recent one was the pandemic had started and the lactation clinics were closed. And the mom was like, I don't know what to do. So she'd been referred for therapy. Well, so I got to do that support there. And she felt very fortunate that that resource was available. But those moms were all moms who were actively seeking out support. So if you think about families who don't have the ability to seek out that support, or who don't have somebody in their life who's saying, yes, those resources are available, or they don't know where to go. So I think making sure those resources are an option.
Good. Yeah, good point, Sarah. So finding resources and that persistence, it shouldn't be that difficult, knowing where those resources are, and especially for those more challenging cases, knowing where our specialists are that can really identify those more technical questions. Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. I'm glad you're out there doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And
I do
know
have one other point on kind
Yes.
of like the flip side of that. So I actually have a
Yes.
sister-in-law who physically cannot breastfeed.
Mhm.
And that does
Mhm.
happen.
Sure.
But I can tell you the shaming around that actually,
Oh.
because we're in a younger generation and that's starting to be more of the thing, right? So now there's a little bit of a, like, you can't breastfeed, like what?
Yeah.
So just recognizing that it does happen, although it's very rare.
Right.
And to know that some families do try and do
Yes.
want to be able to do that and just for various
Mhm.
reasons aren't able to. And so I think we also need to be supportive of families that aren't able to continue and just be encouraging to say, you tried, you did a good job. Like just that whole supporting
Right.
that mental health piece around there, because I've also run into families who feel really bad that they weren't able to continue to.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you raise a really good point. And we hear this a lot, the need for compassion around whatever that family's journey has been, and understanding that they've arrived at the best decision possible for their family. And I think that shaming is an unfortunate backlash, and it's really that lack of compassion and understanding for families that have done everything that they can do. And we definitely do not want to come across as heavy-handed in this all or nothing kind of approach. We understand. I think it's families that have found the resources that they need and have tried what they can, and then arrive at whatever feeding method works best for them. They seldom have any guilt about that because they've done everything. It's the families who didn't know, who couldn't find the support, and then find out later that if they had only known. Yeah, that's what we're trying to avoid. And I know we've got 2 more questions, but 2 more hands up. So how about if we take 1 hands up and then move on to the next question? Because I know that you've got a full agenda, so I want to be respectful of your time as well. So Kimberly, I think you had your hand. Is that okay, Emily? I'm sorry, I know you've got your hand up too, thanks, but maybe we can catch you with the next question. So Kimberly, we'll take your comments and then move to the next slide.
Okay, and actually my comment is really pretty short, and that was, I just wanted to add in there that I think that it would be really helpful, and I had my children 20 plus years ago, so maybe this is different, but my experience was living in a rural area. You know, you meet with a lactation consultant in the hospital, and then you're on your own, and you're an hour more away from a lactation consultant. So you call in, and the feedback you get on the phone was very similar to, at least mine was, what Jennifer had commented. So I just think more resources for rural communities, and now we all have learned quickly how, helpful technology can be, if there's other ways to reach out, for parents to be able to reach out, for mothers to be able to reach out, without having to pack up their children and drive an hour more to the nearest lactation consultant, I think would be helpful. So that was all I had.
Thank you, Kimberly. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And that's something that's a kind of a silver lining that has come out of the pandemic response, is our ability to do telehealth, telelactation. And a lot of our peer supporters and clinicians have figured that out, which I think will be helpful for the rural, especially in rural areas, but even in the cities where moms have that transportation issue. So I think that, can we skip two slides, thanks, and then take it to the summary slide? That one's perfect, because I think that what you all have illustrated is the need for support, compassion, communication skills, but I haven't heard that there's a lack of technical knowledge. I really feel like we've done a good job with getting most people up to, like, I don't know what to do with this formula. I don't know how to store and handle formula. That information is pretty readily available, I think, but this cultural shift to supporting families, especially knowing that a lot of childcare providers may come from a generation in which breastfeeding wasn't the norm, or maybe their own personal experiences weren't as positive. So they may say, I don't know what you're going to do. That happened to me too, So I think changing that to say it is possible. I've heard about these other supports. So I'm wondering if we can take these personal stories, the systems, the public breastfeeding, the fact that prenatally doctors maybe aren't talking about it, those kinds of things. How can we shift to the childcare setting And how can we thread some of these supports into the work that you all are doing? And I do invite those, I know that our time is going to be limited. If you want to continue this conversation, we do have a childcare section that meets every other month, and we have this type of conversation every time. So we can continue the conversation. But I'm wondering what ideas and what suggestions might you have for the cabinet, for some of the programs represented on this panel to support breastfeeding through those agencies and the cabinet.
Brenda, oh,
Sorry, go ahead.
okay, this is Chelsea Schulte. Brenda, I was thinking based on that study you shared about Florida and the directors, program administrators there, you know, the Casito Kits ITSM project has the Directors Alliance. And I thought, what an opportunity to talk with directors and see if the perceptions in Kansas mimic what they found in Florida, to see if that's an area where we might need to really ramp up our efforts, or maybe our directors got it, and maybe that's why we have 90% of families breastfeeding or having the intent to breastfeed. So just one opportunity.
Kelly?
I was just gonna say, I feel like there is an inequity in how moms can access technical support for breastfeeding. And I think if it's a challenge to get it right during those first few weeks, it just sort of snowballs going forward. I'm in early intervention. I know a lot about feeding, but I had a daughter that was in the NICU. I had to go to 3 different breastfeeding clinics until I found Stormont Vale. I'll name that one. I won't name the other hospitals. Stormont Vale.
Yeah.
They were able to help me. But, you know, that took, as people were saying, time. Again, I have a good, stable, supportive job. I had the time off to get that one-on-one care. Previous hospitals were going to charge $30 a session. And, you know, at the point where you're seeking out your second, third hospital, there's a technical issue there. It's not a sit around in a group and everybody nurse their baby and it was going to be a happy experience. Like, we were already having some issues.
Yeah.
So I just feel like if you can't access the right people early on, or you have to pay for it, it sort of really, from the very beginning, puts you on a different track.
Absolutely, Kelly. Thank you. Timing is everything. Yes. Emily.
Yes. So I can speak from it as both like the parent having worked outside the home with my oldest, and then as the provider, but also a provider who breastfed my 2 youngest in the daycare. One of the things when we're talking about support, I think I live in an area that is metropolitan, resources at my fingertips. And so I can see where outside of this, there could be situations where, you know, mothers cannot access what they need quickly. One of the perspectives that I had is kind of following the most recent comments, timing is absolutely crucial, because like for me, I 100% support it. And I've had situations where moms have come to me barely even making enough for that specific day. And by the time we get to the first birthday, we've got 1 to 2 months surplus because of an effort of coming in with the messaging of, hey, mama, you're doing the best that you can. Yeah. That's all I need. Keep going. And then the amounts increase, and reminding them that, you know, hey, the messaging that you give yourself is important. And so I've had some situations where we've been able to be very successful, and everybody walks out very happy. But like one of the things when we had mentioned about making sure, you know, things like transitioning into childcare, quite often if we don't get a baby until they're 12 weeks old, even if we don't get them until 8 weeks old, we don't really have that opportunity, because now we've dropped from the 90% down to the 72. And I've had a good number of families where mom in the interview intended to breastfeed, but by the time they got to my door, even by the time I was checking in and saying, hey, how are things going? I didn't actually have the ability to even support that mom because that timing piece was off. And so ensuring that we are, some of the messages I get, they, couldn't afford the lactation support afterwards or things of that nature. I will say from the provider piece, I've loved the trainings that you've created. I took them years ago. And I think the trainings that exist give a well-rounded, supportive picture for providers. Having been through some training programs with, in grant programs like the Step It Up grant that was around many years ago, the first training session, there was a lot of hurt. Like you could hear the hurt in the providers. The resistance wasn't even that they were opposed to the concept of breastfeeding, but you could hear the hurt and the shame and the disappointment of their own experiences coming out. And you could even hear anger in why wasn't I offered that some of the wording was that they were angry that this may have existed and they didn't know about it. And so some of the success will lie in validating the experience of that provider. If they came from the generation of, hey, my mom was told to take a pill, so I didn't have anybody to support me. I personally had a mother who was trained by Kitty France and who is one of the very foundational proponents of breastfeeding. So I had a mom who could speak to me about, hey, consider these, but a lot of people do not have that. So as we go forward with systems support, ensuring that one of the elements is addressing the fact that many providers may actually have a lot of hurt and shame, and they're not unwilling. And actually, because like the next year when we did that same learning session and I was a mentor, I was able to bring in a lactation consultant, and there was an amazingly excited conversation, and people walked out of that training session with information that they felt they'd never had before. So I think there's interest, but we also have to address that there may be some legitimate bad experiences and some pain attached to, now I have to support this person when nobody supported me.
Right. You're absolutely right. And unfortunately, we hear that in the comments from the Casito course that providers routinely share, if I had only known. If I had only known, or I am so thankful I know this now because my daughter is pregnant or my neighbor is. And so, there is, we've lost several generations of breastfeeding and there's some healing to do around this, Emily. You're right. Amy, and then I think we're going to have to wrap up here in a few minutes, but hopefully we can also, let's go to Amy and then we can also take a few more comments, I think.
Hi. So I was just going to maybe make an observation from a program perspective. So I wonder how many programs have issues, maybe logistical issues would be a better word. Like our program, it was never designed to have infant care. So we start with 1 and up. So a lot of, it's very infrequent that we get breastfeeding mothers by the time the children come to our program. But it doesn't not happen. And I've wished that we had the setup to really accommodate that, because we've tried putting, like a nice rocking chair in the one's room. But it's not quiet. It's got, you've got all the other children around. We're worried about them getting their fingers rocked on and, things like that. So then we take we eventually took it out of the room, but, wanting to have another place, we don't even have a conference room, but if we had a place that was quiet that we could put a rocker, that would be great. Maybe if we could, some facilities may have a space that could be divided. Maybe they could throw up, a couple of walls in a corner and create a small room that could be a lactation room. That might take funding, it might take some sort of infrastructure support, but maybe there are places that could retrofit a little bit to kind of help support those families, at least in places that weren't already designed to.
Yeah. Thank you, Amy. And I think you've raised a good point. Is sometimes there's technical solutions. We've talked a lot about more like adaptive solutions, culture shift things, and some of these are technical solutions. And thankfully, we have experience and partners with experience. Chris Nicholson and I have worked with a lot of programs to help them figure out those very sorts of things. So we're ready to do that and have some experience. I'm wondering, so what I've heard is that we know a continuum of support. Childcare providers, I think of it as like a relay race. We're passing the baton at some point to childcare providers in this continuum of breastfeeding support. What can we do to set them up for success so that when they do encounter a breastfeeding family, that they are both knowledgeable technically, as well as understand the support that might be required, processing their own experience, but maybe setting that aside for what this family needs? How can we set that up in a systems level approach?
Brenda, this is Paula Neth. I'm just wondering, we now have the nurse health consultants. And so I'm wondering what role they could play in supporting provider questions that may come up. And that's a new role in our system. And I think that might be an opportunity and a resource for childcare providers. And if they don't know the answer, they would at least be able to connect them to the answer.
Great point, Paula. And we are connected with several of them. We did the training, but I think there's definitely more opportunity as that program grows. Yeah. Amy, you had your hand up. Did you have? Okay.
Hi, Brenda. This is Peggy. Kelly. I just wanted to say, from more of a system perspective, one of the things that you did with us several years ago now, I don't even know how long ago it's been, is approached us about just educating our staff. And we started with our early Head Start home visitors and our education coordinators, and just starting to infuse the knowledge and information into our system. And I would say that it's been extremely successful. I think all the early Head Starts, would now consider themselves breastfeeding friendly and know how to support the families and have a positive process in place. So I think just if any time that we can approach providers from a group or a systems group as well, it may be heard a little differently if maybe what's the Kansas AEYC chapter or a CCPC or any place where providers gather as a small group might be allow people to listen from more of a open getting information perspective rather than when maybe a one-on-one could just bring up defenses. Not that that's also important too, but it's just different when you're getting information for you to consider and think about rather than feel like you're being confronted with a change you must make, or that could feel like criticism because, I didn't know that, I've not done that, even though I know that's not the way it's presented, but just, we're human, right? So I don't know, just a thought, if anybody has opportunities to access groups of people, professionals that could help to infuse this and just make it normal and natural in our expectations and approach with families, I think it just makes a big difference in helping it become that.
Yeah. Thank you, Peggy. And yes, we've had the pleasure of being at the, and so many of those conferences, and thank you for the opportunity over the years to do the training. If others have ideas, whether it's piggybacking off of what Peggy shared with trainings, groups like the health consultants, please feel free to reach out to me at the KBC if you want to be a part of our section. And I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to you all. Hopefully there will be, the conversation will continue on the panel about recommendations for what can we do. And I really appreciate you, and especially those that shared your own individual stories. I think that's how we learn, is really those stories about how this is really working. So thank you so much for your time, for the panel. Thanks, Amanda. I know that you need to move on to a break. So thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Brenda. I think we can all have a big virtual round of applause for a really fantastic conversation. And thanks to all of you for, I think that there's a lot in here that we can dig into. So Brenda, I know that you can follow up with Debbie to consider what next steps we might need to take as a result of this conversation. And certainly if anybody has additional ideas or pieces that come up, feel really welcome to reach out to either Brenda or Debbie. We are going to take a break at 10:05, and then we are going to keep our agenda, but reorder it just slightly. So we're going to start with the Our Tomorrow's Story Bank, and then we're going to finish our meeting with our COVID-19 reflections, but we'll be back at 10:15. Sound good? Awesome. Enjoy your 10 minutes. Stretch.
Amanda, is there any support you need from me to make the changes happen? I mean, just the flow of everything.
Sorry, Debbie, I didn't mean to mute you. I was trying to unmute myself. Nope, we're in good shape. I just moved the slides around. I'll turn this into a PDF so that we don't have to flip back and forth. Okay. Do we know, Jenny has the slides, right? So she's ready to share her piece?
She should be.
You should be? Okay, I'll go ahead and throw the break slide up, but you can take it down when she's ready to start sharing. Oh, that's not what I want.
Because since we were scheduled to end at 11, we can come back around to those COVID conversations at the end, if the timing goes right. That was a great conversation with Brenda.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like the way that she scaffolded those questions to start with personal experience and then shift into systems thinking. That was really cool. Bria, I do think that the nurse health consultants are the child care health consultants. That might be a good piece for us to make a note of when we have the COVID conversation. And Debbie, just so you know, Sarah Rivers and Gail Kozad both sent me a quick message saying that they would have to hop off before.
Okay.
For the end, but we should be in good shape.
Well, and Angie is going to speak to the child care health consultants.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Later, so that's a good good thing since it was already brought up.
Perfect. I'll be back in 5-ish minutes. Feel welcome to take away my screen share if Jenny's ready to take it over.
Hey, Debbie.
Yes, hello.
I was just going to tell you, so we have Brenda coming to present to all of the home visitors, like the therapists and the case managers, because there is I feel like I'm starting all over, like literally, like, okay, like knowledge, which is almost to Peggy's point, infusing all of that and how it works. So we've seen a big disconnect between families that are breastfeeding within family pres versus receiving formula. So I'm excited to get her started in that. So she's meeting with the team end of the month, I think it is.
Well, and are you referring to the DECA home visitors? Right.
Yeah.
Okay, because one of my thoughts when she was talking about that is, I've just recently joined the state's home visiting team, and I'm going to start asking some questions about how if or how it's incorporated into their work, because if it isn't, then we definitely need to address that. And if it is, do they need to get with her on, helping with that? So
yeah, I'm excited. It'll be good. Like, and when I asked the staff, You just, sometimes you take for granted that they know those things. And because their age span is so wide from 0 to 18, they're like, oh man, we don't know a whole lot about that. And especially it's complicated, like when there's trauma already in a family and use that for, this is bonding time, right? So it's like bonding and relationship building with your infant. So I'll be curious to see. We're excited about her presenting.
Well, and the other piece that I, didn't want to take the time up from, but I want to talk to her about is just how do moms communicate to their employers? Because I did not choose to breastfeed because I was working outside the home. And I just thought there's no way that I can do this, and of course that was many, many years ago, but, making sure that there's the support there to, maybe train them on how to talk to their employer and, how to make that work. It's not easy, I know.
Especially when the majority of our families are truly working low income wages, like like whether it's fast food restaurants or and organizations that usually don't lend as positive with taking breaks on a regular basis to do that.
Yeah, definitely. Hi, Jenny.
Good morning.
And Amanda just asked me and I said, yes, I think so, that you're ready to share your slides next. Okay.
Hi, Jenny, are you there?
I am. Good morning.
Good morning. Would you like to share slides and drive on your end?
Yep, I can do that.
Perfect. I'll stop sharing.
Does that work?
Yep,
Okay.
that's perfect.
And Melissa, I want to be respectful of your time. So do you want to jump in here first so you can get going? Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for being flexible. We were having a really fantastic conversation. Melissa, you'll appreciate this. Today is match day. And so my brother and his girlfriend in 45 minutes will figure out whether or not they match together. So I am.
Oh my goodness. Fingers crossed. That must be stressful.
We're just going to be.
What does that mean?
It's a question. Yeah, it's where they go. So they're finishing medical school, but it's where they go for residency. And I do not entirely understand it, but there's like this very complicated computer system where they say where they want to go and other people say who want them. And then if all the stars align, they both end up at the same place.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that would be a huge day. Well, good luck to them.
Awesome. Well, thanks, everybody. I really appreciate that. It's 10:15, so we are going to kick off our conversation about understanding and elevating unheard voices in the Our Tomorrow's Story Bank. Melissa, we really appreciate you joining us to kick off this conversation and frame what we're talking about here.
Thanks, Amanda. And I appreciate the panel members for letting me drop in and just frame this for you. As we have worked very hard in this first year of the Early Childhood Recommendations Panel to establish norms and procedures and all the traditions that will guide the work and inform the role the panel has in the larger governance structure. A lot of the work that you have done has originated with the panel, which is one way that projects can be brought to the attention of either the Children's Cabinet or any other appropriate state agency or organization. So you all have had some tremendous work going on, the transitions work that was brought to the Children's Cabinet was an example of this structure operating as intended. Today, we get a really exciting opportunity to establish the other direction of communication. This is an ask from me on behalf of the Children's Cabinet and the work that we are doing to ask you, the Early Childhood Recommendations Panel, to engage in some work that is related in the Cabinet's commitment to equity and to our work on our federal preschool development grant project. And so just it threads through a lot of the different work that the Children's Cabinet in particular undertakes, the work that we're doing to keep our needs assessment current, the work that we're doing to ensure our strategic plan can be enacted in the spirit intended, and to keep our partner agencies on track. So I'm going to allow Jenny to roll out the conversation and set the tone for what we need the ask of you, the panel, but I'm just super excited to see this new dimension of the work of the recommendations panel get underway. So with that, I'm going to fade to black here and leave you guys to do your work. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Melissa. So I'm Jenny Flinders, a member of the panel with you all, and also I work at the Center for Public Partnerships and Research at KU, and have had the pleasure of leading some of this Our Tomorrow's work for the past several months. I have an assumption that many of you have seen this, heard this, know what Our Tomorrow's is, but I also have the assumption that some listening and maybe a few of you don't. So I'm gonna fly through this to preserve our conversation time, but just to set the stage here. The Our Tomorrow's project is a story collection tool, a project where we are listening to the lived experiences and stories of Kansans through this process called sense making, and it creates for us this statewide story bank. We get to do some community sense making with that, where we come together and try to understand those experiences through pattern analysis and story reading and conversations with communities where those stories actually come from. And then from that, we've also been rolling out community action labs. So there's nuance to this process and to what this project can do. It's also allowing us to, as Melissa said, lift up that parent voice and choice in the broader systems work that we're doing. It's providing the opportunity for decision makers at the local level and at the state level to respond rapidly to things that we're seeing and hearing from real people and families as we work towards systems change together. And it's also particular to what we're going to talk about today. It's helping us really pinpoint needs and identify gaps specific to who we are as Kansans and across our many and varying identities and experiences, and allowing us to be able to zero in on those needs and actually make some change for that. I wanted to, some of you have probably seen this, but I think it's really important to get an example of why this is so important to think about who is represented in the story bank, because one of the great things we were able to do this year, and I think this also sets the stage for some of that COVID discussion later in reflection. One of the things we were able to do with the Our Tomorrow's work this past year was to hear from the story bank itself and the analysis of the patterns that were coming out of the stories, that families were really struggling with a lack of access to technology and internet. And maybe that seems obvious and like not such a surprise to many of you, but when you can see it emerge in actual voices and in the data, it's very powerful, and it gives us the opportunity to say, hey, let's do something about this. And also relevant to what we're going to talk about here in a minute, we can also zero in on what in the survey we call the disruptor, what this disruptor, who it's really particularly affecting. And here you can see we noted that, especially for those with marginalized racial identities and those with really low household incomes, this was a particular issue. I've shared a story here, one of those stories that led to this finding and how we shared it out with the state. So you can see this family said, or this individual said, that one of the families that I provide services for found out they had to quarantine for 2 weeks. They have 6 kids with 2 in grade school. This has been a difficult time for the family as they do not have internet, and the older children are doing remote learning. The mom explained that the older kids have been going to the neighbors to use the internet when they need to do homework, and it has been hard for them to quarantine. So again, stories we've been hearing for months now, I think all of us, and we'll continue to talk about as we talk about COVID, but relevant to this discussion, that allowed the Children's Cabinet and the state directors of agencies to help fund this technology for families and remote learning grants through the CARES Act funds. And so directly because of the voices that we're hearing in Our Tomorrows, we were able to leverage those voices to really get families what they needed, which was one of the cooler things I think we've seen and watched sort of happen full circle this year with Our Tomorrows. So we did continue to collect stories from those that were receiving those grants and that technology. And so here you can see what we heard back. Our family did not own a tablet, iPad, or PC. We missed months of sessions with our therapist when they were restricted to only virtual home visits, and we didn't have the equipment to participate. With our new tablet and Wi-Fi, we are now able to participate in classroom instruction, meet virtually with our son's therapists and teachers, and see our doctor virtually when necessary. It really has changed our lives for the better, and we'd like to thank you for helping us. And so when we think about how we leverage these voices and who we're hearing from and really the power behind them and what can be done, this is, I think, a really good example of why this is so important. And so here is this. We're talking today about what we are calling unheard voices. Excuse me one second. Debbie, I've got the dry mouth now too. So we're talking about how we can, as a panel, help elevate, expand, increase the voices that we're hearing in the bank. In particular, some voices from those who might be more unheard in the state and in the work that we do. I'm sorry, hold on one second. All right. So a couple of things about this. It's not just about, do we check every box of every identity out there and get that one story, and then we anecdotally use it and sort of enroll with our feel good sort of representation from there. What we're talking about is having enough representation in many diverse ways in the story bank so that we can do more of that decision-making work based on those patterns of experiences that we're seeing, detect emerging signals, and host those community-based sense-making experiences with the communities themselves. Because one of the things that is amazing about our tomorrows and the sense-making process is that we as researchers don't come in and analyze it. The story sharer goes through a survey of questions to analyze, to make sense of their story themselves. And so that is how we are looking at patterns and learning more about who it is in the state that's telling us these experiences. This also means that if we get significant representation across many unheard voices, then we have the ability to advocate for them and their collective voices with policymakers. And of course, as I mentioned, the sense making and the action labs, in order for us to do that in an ethical and meaningful way, we need a sort of threshold of stories to be able to do it, to protect identity and confidentiality, and to make sure that we're really well representing communities as we do this work. So with that, I will give you a snapshot as of yesterday of where we are with the story bank. So we have 2,432 stories. I can tell you that this is since March 27th of 2020. So we're at just about a year for this iteration of the tool. I've pulled a few pieces of information here. We're going to get into more of this in a minute and have some conversation about what it means to be an unheard voice here in Kansas and who we want to target and reach out to and elevate as we identify more voices in the state. But right now, about 75% of the stories are coming from women. Those who identify as women, and about just over 24% are stories from people of color. And I have many more data points and details on all of these things that I can pull out and use as we're talking and that we can send as a follow-up. I didn't want to overload you with a ton of data on these slides so that we could have a good conversation. But please ask if you have questions as I'm going through any of this. Close to 10% have said that they have an annual family income of under $20,000. 7.5% identified as single parents. We've got about just over 7% that are 65 or older. And we hopefully will have time for you to see some of what we're seeing about COVID and vaccines later, but we do have been asking about COVID experiences and more recently vaccine experiences. And so right now about 49% have told us that they are COVID essential workers. So here's how I'm going to frame this for us today. There's so many ways that we can cut this and talk about representation and equity. One of the things that I have been really proud of in this work is that aside from asking just basic demographic information, we actually ask people to tell us in these experiences that they're sharing what kind of voice best represents them in that experience. So what you're seeing here are those answers. This means that what they're telling us is that of all the possibilities here of how they consider their identity, and we do acknowledge and respect that people have intersectional identities across a lot of different experiences and categories, but this is them telling us how they most importantly or top of mind identify in these experiences that they're sharing with us. So we call these the unheard voices. And for some feedback and discussion at this point now, before we sort of make our ask for you all to help us increase these voices in the story bank, I will sort of present to you how we think about what an unheard voice is. So working class families, those with special healthcare needs, single parents, those who were once or are currently incarcerated. And you can see we did hear from some of those individuals, those who struggle with mental health, immigrants, or those who speak a home language other than English, those in remote or rural communities, service providers we've included as a voice that we've pulled out, those with marginalized racial, gender, and or sexual orientation identities. And then we also allow people to tell us that they have another voice that needs to be heard. It's not a fill in the blank box. So I have done some analysis of those stories, who clicked that and said that we weren't representing them yet. I can tell you that some early thoughts on that on my end are that might be those who are in our younger group. We do collect stories from those as young as 13. So I thought that was sort of interesting. So I'm happy to flip back and forth between any of these slides and data points. And like I said, I have further breakdowns of things if you have questions, but if we could just have a little discussion about, what does it mean to you all? What do you think it means to be a Kansas family? And are there unheard voices in here that I have here this question that we're missing, but also that maybe are popping out to you or sticking out to you that resonate with the communities and organizations that you all work for? Because ultimately we're going to ask you to help us increase these voices. So.
Thank you, Jenny. Go ahead, Sarah.
One of the unheard voices, well, two of them that just kind of pop out to me, particularly in our nation, as we hear about racial inequalities and that kind of thing, is they really only heard from 1.8% of those who don't speak English and those who fall in a racial or gender inequality kind of category or identify with that. So I think that's an area that we could work to improve. Particularly if we think about some of our rural communities out in Western Kansas. I know a lot of those families do not speak English as their primary language in their home. I know in my experience, a lot of those families who identify with a racial group other than Caucasian have difficulties being heard in situations or have different experiences. So I think if we can find ways to help get those opinions and those voices heard better, and maybe part of that is making sure that there's people who are reaching out to those families in their native language, or making an extra effort to reach out to families who fall in those racial inequality groups, so that we for sure getting those voices heard. It may skew survey results just a little bit. But if we take time to really reach out to those families, I think that that would be worth the effort. I think a lot of those groups also fall in your lower income family categories too. And so, you kind of hit three voices there.
Yeah, that's great, Sarah. I will, that reminded me to add that we do have the survey, the link and the survey in full in Spanish. And have received a handful of stories back in Spanish. So the translation services can go both ways. So we are equipped to do this in Spanish, but also in many other languages. If there are communities that speak a specific language and want this translated, we have the ability to do that. So. Other thoughts? Anybody? I'll go back. I guess, Sarah, while people are thinking, I will share that, like I said, so we're seeing 1.9% of folks who said they identify with this sort of marginalized racial or gender or sexual orientation identity. But that earlier, I have the controls, I can do this. We've got 24% who actually did identify as people of color in total. And so that is spread across those who identified as Black or African American, American Indian, Alaska Native, Indigenous, but government labels and all, Asian, Hispanic. And then we allow people to tell us that that they are self-describe their identity, their racial identity, or that they are multi-racial. So across, I think we have Pacific Islander in there as well. So across all of those racial identities that make up that 24%.
This is Lori Kravitz. This is on maybe what can we do? And I'm just kind of, I don't know, thinking broadly. I don't know if any of you are familiar, like there are those, we have one in our other suite in our bureau, one of those survey stands that just ask questions and you just, select an answer. I don't really know how those function and how they're set up, but I'm thinking specifically about like the population of bilingual or Spanish speaking citizens. I wonder if we're not maybe going to the best place to get their attention or to engage with them. And I'm just wondering if maybe we could utilize those stands in those survey stands and maybe the grocery stores that are specific to, like I know in North Topeka, there is a Hispanic grocery store. We know a large percent of Hispanic the population go and shop there, or in some of their Hispanic churches. I just wonder if there's that maybe we need to broaden our thinking for engaging with some of those folks, even if it's just to capture their attention and then get them somewhere else. I don't know. It was just a thought. I just thought it's worth maybe just throwing out there.
Thanks, Lori. I think, I know we have helped roll out some of those stands before. And the ones that I'm familiar with, I don't know if they allow for enough of a like story typing, but it could, that's an idea. I also think we've had a lot of requests lately for QR codes, which can be put in like waiting rooms and places like that for people. It's mobile capable, so people can QR code scan it and go on their way and do their survey on their own. So. Anybody else have any thoughts or questions about, I'm watching my time and so sort of sorry to fly through all of this, but I also wonder, Amanda and Debbie and team, since ultimately this is an ask from the cabinet and the state early childhood systems team, to have you all go out into your networks, help us collect stories from particular voices, connect with these communities and organizations and businesses that can help us do this. We can all kind of sit with it too. We can send some materials out with the link. I'll make sure we get a Spanish link as well. And then maybe regroup, hear how it's going and if anyone has had any success reaching out to folks in a month. I don't know.
I think that's a fantastic idea, Jenny. So can I repeat back to make sure I'm understanding correctly? So you're asked for all of us, you're going to provide some materials to Debbie that she can send out in the follow-up email next week. And then our to-do is to take this, and I know that many of us, as this was rolling out as part of the needs assessment, shared this, but our to-do is to go back to our agencies and our organizations and share, it's still going to be incredibly important that we're hearing from Kansas families as we inform the next phase of our Kansas response. And we all can brainstorm about how can we get this out with a particular emphasis on making sure that we are reaching some of those unheard voices. And then we'll kind of report back in a month in terms of support. If we have any questions as we're going, I'm assuming that you are the person to reach out to on that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I would just add sort of as a point to help us all sort of get thinking and know what the real ask is here. What are, we're a small team, a part of this very big project, and we're so grateful for all the work everyone has done to continue to collect these stories and get the word out. The most effective thing that's going to happen for us, or that can happen for us, would be not to brainstorm a whole big list of things that we then need to sift through and go, try to implement, but that we as a panel in our vaster networks are actually helping to encourage folks to share these stories, and that you're having maybe that point of contact conversation with the Hispanic grocery store, right? And at which point, if they are hearing from you and their community about the importance of maybe wanting to help collect stories, we can then connect with them. You get sort of that soft, warm handoff. We're super happy to help with that. But it's an active ask from the panel for sure, or from the cabinet for sure.
Does that make sense, panel members? Go ahead, Cassandra.
I was just going to say, this is Cassandra Sines, and I'm a parent and from the KDHE family delegate for this year. I just see the low number of people identifying as having a child with special health care needs. And that concerns me, but I can understand it as well. Those families are overwhelmed. I mean, I'm overwhelmed right now. And I only have one of my kiddos at home. But right now, I'm running that child back and forth to school 4 times a day. I mean, I'm making 4 round trips a day to take my son to 2 classes because we had originally decided on remote learning. So I'm not getting much done when he's in school. And that's not having anything to do with therapy. That's all related to his education needs. So it's hard. It's going to be hard to get families that have children with special health care needs to share their stories.
Sorry, Cassandra, go ahead.
Oh, you're fine.
I really appreciate that and you speaking up. One thing I will clarify, though, not to caveat what you're saying at all, is that this is how the person telling the story is identifying. So this is not necessarily I have children with special healthcare needs, but I have special healthcare needs, and I will tell you that we do have quite, not enough, but a good amount of stories of parents talking about those experiences with their children who have specific needs and special healthcare needs. I think that you bring up also just one thought I'm having as I was listening to you share your story, and I really appreciate it. Some of this might not be I'm going to share a link with an organization. Some of this might be, I want to talk to a group that works with a particular kind of parent about how they might be able to help those parents with these surveys or collect these stories. We've had some providers that will do the survey with the parent or help take it for them. So all you have to do as a parent is tell your story while I type it and ask you some questions. And it's during our home visit or it's during our time together, and that reduces that burden on the family, but still make sure that we hear from them. So those would be some other things you could think about how we can get those voices increased here.
Okay.
I am going to go ahead.
Was it me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I didn't hear you. This is Amy Godchammer. Well, we had a really good discussion at the office hours for our tomorrows yesterday. And Mandy helped us come up with some good ways to sort of incentivize collection. And so I don't know if anybody has heard these, but that I guess there are some places out there that at least in terms of childcare, they've had like a gift basket, and they would say, for the first 25 people that sit down and at the desk and fill out a story, you can get something out of the gift basket, or like a raffle, and you get a ticket for each time somebody stops and does that. Or like we don't have parents coming in because of the pandemic, so they have to line up in their cars in the morning, and even just making like a QR code that they can just take a snapshot of, and then while they're sitting in their car waiting their turn to get in, either for drop off or pickup, that they can fill it out while they're waiting. So it just kind of give them some opportunities when you have that captive audience.
That's great. Thanks, Amy. Mandy is full of good ideas for sure.
Any other questions or comments, panel members? Sorry, go ahead, Jenny.
That's what I was going to say. And I was going to kind of flip it to you and pull my slides down. I have not been able to see the chat while I'm sharing. So I guess we can't chat.
There we go. That makes it easy. Well, thanks everybody. There will be information on that in the follow-up materials that Debbie sends next week. I appreciate you taking this back to your organizations and brainstorming what each of you and what each of your organizations can do to help spread this message. And Jenny, we know that we can connect with you if we have any other questions or feedback or other pieces to share.
Amanda, if I could jump in just one, sorry, as one comment or note had come in. We do, all the stories are time-stamped. I think you'll, we are definitely able to track stories day by day, month by month, week by week. So yes, good point to make that what you saw were numbers of an entire year's worth of collection. And if anyone is particularly interested about representational data of a particular time period or more recently or the past month, please get in touch with us. Yeah.
Thank you, Jenny. That leads really nicely into the last item on our agenda. About every quarter, we're going to take time to stop and reflect and have a conversation about the pandemic. And the reason why we're doing this, the kind of pull back the curtain, the thinking here, we know that there is just things are moving really quickly, opportunities come really quickly. And as we are each in our organizations, our agencies, as we are developing what is happening and what's moving forward, it's helpful to continue to be able to reference and understand, all right, what are early childhood stakeholders in Kansas seeing and feeling and experiencing? What keeps bubbling up as really high priorities, and what do we all need to know so that when we are kind of figuring out, all right, how do we have some information about, say, a new federal funding source or a new opportunity that's come along, what can we use that's already kind of there, easy to pick up and use to be able to help inform the next steps and what happens next. So as a panel, about every quarter, we're going to have a big picture conversation about COVID-19 and the pandemic to just continue to take that time to get up on the balcony and to take a look at where we're at as a state, and to think about what really continues to be a priority and where we need to be focusing our attention. So today, I really appreciate that we are going to start by having, we've done this before, so our meeting minutes will continue to be a really important artifact or a really important takeaway from this conversation. So please do, on these months where we have this conversation, please do take the time to take a look at those minutes. Feel really welcome. It won't hurt our feelings. Feel really welcome to let us know if there's something where we could more clearly capture the feedback that you were sharing or a point that was made, so that we can continue to use these and refer to these minutes as notes. So today we're going to start with a couple of pieces of information, and then we are going to have some reflection time. And so Lori is going to get us started by talking about some data from the Kansas Department of Health and Environment.
Great, thank you so much. So this is just a little general information about really where we're at or where we have been with temporary closures with childcare since the pandemic started. And so just to let you know, from the beginning of the pandemic, or just a few weeks right after, KDHE put a survey on our webpage where providers could let us know that they were closing temporarily. And then shortly thereafter, we put a link so that they could also let us know when they reopened. This let us have some real-time counts for closures and reopens. And so we continue to track that. And what we have found is that there has never been a time where we've had more than 16% of our total facilities closed at any given time. Now, we do acknowledge that it is based on what has been reported. So we trust that our surveyors are continuing to engage with our providers and encourage that they report these closures, and then of course come back and let us know when they're opening. And we see that they're doing that, so we trust that. It is important too, just to note that KDHE and also Child Care Aware did some follow-up surveys just to understand why they were closing, why providers were closing, and what the needs were. Specifically, KDHE was trying to gain information about why they were closed. And really what we found, this recent survey that we did, it was in the fall, was that the number one reason why providers were closing wasn't related to a specific exposure or a positive test result, although we do have facilities that are closed for quarantine or test results that were positive, but their number one reported reason for closure was really related to their own concerns for the health of themselves or their families or their staff. So that in and of itself has been a great opportunity for us to engage with Child Care Aware and the new child care health consultants. And they're working with them and walking through some of those fears and helping them navigate mitigation. And hopefully we're going to continue to see those reopenings happening there where they don't have a reason other than fear. And I don't mean to minimize that, but they don't have an exposure or a reason to quarantine. So this right here is just some closure data of where we were. Now, on the previous slide, I did say 16%, but that's every month included. So this is just a point in time where I'm giving you some closure data where we were at any given time. And this screen looks a lot different than my screen that I sent. So I don't know why it looks so kind of hooky here, but you can
Sorry about that, Lori. That's definitely
no,
something
that's
on my
okay.
computer.
So I'm like, I don't know what happened here, but it's you can just see how the percentage of our facilities that were closed at these particular points in time. So overall, Kansas, what this says to me is we have very dedicated providers in the state of Kansas. If they didn't have to close, they didn't. So kudos to our childcare providers. So the other thing I wanted to just mention here was the vaccination. We are getting calls about childcare workers and vaccinations. So I just wanted to take a minute and I think we passed a slide here too. Is there one right before this?
I don't think so.
We're going the wrong way, I think. Oh, so there was another slide just before this, and I'm going to go ahead and send it to you. There's a slide that has actual links for and I don't know where that went to because it is missing. So links
is that Lori, the kansasvaccine.gov website?
Yes.
I can pull that up.
Yep. Okay, that's great. So we just really want to remind everyone that vaccine information is available on the kansasvaccine.gov website, and that there are weekly updates available every single Thursday. And so we encourage everyone to check there every week. And so for accurate information, for new information, there's a vaccine dashboard that has information that's updated every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday by 12:30. So please do visit there to get the most current information available. So thank you, Amanda, for taking us directly to that site. And if you want to go ahead and go to that next slide, then that would be great. So really what I wanted to just mention here was that we are in phase 2 vaccination. And what is a child care worker? So Kansas is still very focused on completing phase 2 in many counties. One of the questions that we frequently get asked is a child care provider a child care worker? And yes, they are. So they are included in that phase 2. Our system of record for child care licensing, it is CLARIS, it is Child Care Licensing and Regulation Information System. And that data shows us that we have 30,600 individual child care facility affiliates individuals. And that information has been reported to the local health department so that they know how many vaccines that they actually need by county. So we, KDHE did recently just conduct a survey with the local health departments to see if childcare facilities affiliates have been vaccinated. Many of those have been done, but what we do know for sure is that if they haven't been completed, they are underway, and that there is enough vaccine to complete what needs to be finished. I think that's what's key here, is that childcare providers are childcare workers. Local health departments know what they need. It's either completed or it's underway and should be completed. So next slide. What if there's a childcare provider that says, I don't have any information, I didn't know I could be vaccinated, what do I need to do? They should be directed to their local health department, and they should give that local health department their information. I am a childcare provider. The local health department should have their name. If there's any question at all, they can engage KDHE directly, and we will make sure that that information, but again, the local health department was already given that information, but anywhere that we can help smooth the transition, if there's a bump in the road, we will. We did put a note on here. There are preschool programs that do operate within a school district. So it's important to note that preschool program staff that are working within the school-based programs, they were vaccinated with the K-12 rollout. So if anyone was missed, they too should need to contact either the administrator for that school or the local health department. This would be a place where they wouldn't necessarily come back to us. So key thing here is childcare workers are in the phase 2, and we want them taken care of. So that's all I have, Melissa. I'm so sorry, Amanda.
Oh, you're good. So thank you, Lori. That's very helpful information. Everybody, do we have any questions about either the data that Lori shared, and I can pull that up on the screen in a different format if that would be helpful, or about the vaccine information that Lori shared? All right, Jenny will now share a little bit about a different way that we can use the Our Tomorrow's Story Bank in this way.
Yep. Thanks, Amanda. You can go to the next slide. So I guess just a quick note to let you all know that we did add a question this year in early 2021 to find out more about not just COVID experiences, but now vaccination experiences. And you can see here as of earlier this week, we, and as I have personally been tracking this sort of day to day, week to week, sort of consistently sitting between 20 to 25% of folks telling us they do not plan to get vaccinated. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. Watching my time here. So we just wanted to share with you all for your thoughts and consideration in your communities and in your organizations, and as you're working with providers, particularly what we're seeing so far about who it is that is telling us that they might be hesitant or not interested in getting vaccinated. You can see here on the screen. I'm so sorry, we won't maybe have time to talk through this, but most concerning to me is this number that a very large percentage of them also told us they are considered essential workers. And of course, we really want, that includes service providers as it's coded in our bank. And we really want these folks to have access and be willing and excited to get vaccinated for COVID-19. So also you can see that when I looked at the counties of where these individuals are from, a decent percentage live in what we call frontier counties. So these are our rural friends and communities. And maybe take a moment to look at that story when you get the materials after or before. You probably had access to them already, but if you want to understand a little bit more about who these folks are and what experiences they're going through, I will tell you that, like this story I've shared here, everything else I was reading isn't specific to like, I am so tired of hearing about vaccinations, or I'm scared to get it, or they actually don't mention vaccination at all. These are experiences of people who are struggling and going through many of the same things we are and those in our communities are. And I think what I just want to highlight is that this means that these are folks, as this story is showing us, who are going through things for whom the vaccination will help get us the relief that we all need. And so there's a window and I think things to be leveraged there as we work with our communities and our partners around why this is so important and how we can all pull ourselves out of this together. So I will stop there. There's more stories to read in the materials.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jenny. So everybody, I do want to acknowledge that when we were first budgeting our agenda for this meeting, we've had some fantastic conversation today, and I appreciate that. But if you took a look at the agenda and saw that we would wrap up by 11, it's 10:59, and you can feel welcome to take that and go. For those of you who kept the extra half hour chunked out on your calendar to perhaps to have some quiet time to work, instead, I think we can have some active time for conversation. And so we've got the rest of our meeting time here before we wrap up to discuss and to have some reflection on where we're at as we're considering the Kansas COVID-19 response. So, you know, as I was thinking about how we might frame this conversation, we got some information back today, and we have, I think, the opportunity to think about what else we need to learn. So I think to start off, my question for all of you, and I'll put this in the chat bar too, is what do we know so far? I mean, what have we seen and heard and experienced in our work and in our communities? And what do we still need to learn?
So this is Cornelia, and I don't know that I'm going to try to make my comments and ask questions where it actually answers the question that you asked rather than like starting a whole different conversation. And so, you know, of course, we have scheduled and had offered all of our employees the vaccine. About 50% of them so far have, we've gotten our first dose. And so definitely in agreement with the hesitancy that some people have, you know, in terms of getting the vaccine. Some of the things that we're looking for in terms of guidance as a licensed childcare provider or preschool provider is now what? And so, you know, we have all of these pandemic policies in place, you know, and so as vaccines, you know, start increasing, will there be guidance on now what can we loosen the reins on? Because right now, I feel like as the CEO that I'm making decisions and I'm just making stuff up. Is it okay now to start letting parents in or not? Is it okay now to start, you know, whatever? And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, you know, and so, you know, it would be helpful, you know, if there's some guidance for providers that really had a lot of, you know, because we changed our total environment operation in terms of how we function and the things that we do. And now that the world is slowly, you know, going to a place where we're trying to find a way to get back to normal, or whatever the new or the new normal, and what should that new normal look like? Guidance on that would be helpful. And I know that the state is kind of, I don't want to say backed off of, but they're allowing local community health departments to give, you know, that guidance. But honestly, I still go to the KDHE website hoping to find like updates to recommendations or guidance or something from someone. And I just think something like that would be really helpful as we're now trying to figure out what things should look like once we've had our vaccines, or the majority of people have had vaccines, or now that numbers are low enough, you know, that maybe we can start loosening things up. And what is it okay to kind of ease off on versus what we need to keep doing? That makes sense?
It does.
Amanda, can I speak to that? This is Lori.
Please do, yeah.
I just want to say that CDC did just put out some updated guidance, and we are actually looking at our guidance now with that, and we will be hopefully very soon putting out some updated guidance. So stay tuned for that. We just received that this week, so just stay tuned.
Thank you so much.
I know that I'm sure a lot of people are really excited that that's coming, and I do want to give just a tremendous kudos. I know that it's been more than a year, and Lori, I don't know how many times the KDHE team has updated that guidance, but I know that for me, certainly the complexity of taking the federal guidance and the state guidance and local gating criteria or whatever it might be, and figuring out how all of those pieces fit together. I know that I'm so appreciative that we've got really, really smart public health people in Kansas who are working on that stuff. So thank you. I know that you probably, I don't even know what update version you're on of this stuff by now, but we appreciate it.
Agreed. Yeah, thank you for that.
Thanks for some personal commentary there, folks. What else do we, what do we know? What do we really think is important at this juncture? And what don't we know?
Amanda, this is Paula Neff.
Mm-hmm.
I've been thinking a lot about the new American Relief Plan and all the new funding that's going to be coming into the state.
Yep.
And just wondering, I know that we've been working really hard to figure out the most recent $10 billion that was given to the states. And I just think that we really have an opportunity to think about these new dollars and about how we can really start creating and supporting this childcare system. And so don't know if there's any opportunity or need for this group to engage in conversations so we can start thinking about those dollars now, so that when we get the notice of what amount we're going to be getting as a state, we're ready to rock and roll.
And I'll be really, thank you, Amy Gottschammer for adding a thumbs up there. I know that on the Kansas State Department of Education side, we're the timing, we are kind of chunking out, helping districts figure out what they need to do with the second round, which is the 10 that was in the same bill, Paula, is the 10 billion that you referenced that went out, and we're have not yet received guidance from our federal partners for the American Relief Plan. I have no idea whether or not that's the same for other agencies, but I think that you're right. I know that one piece that has been really helpful for us has been to be able to look and see what feedback we've gathered over the past year as a good starting point, so that we're not starting from, so that we can kind of acknowledge the pieces that are there. So I don't know whether our partners at DCF are taking a similar approach as they're thinking about the additional childcare dollars. And Nikki, I don't know if you've got anything else to share on that piece.
So yeah, so we have been working with the representatives from the Children Cabinet, and Lori and Amy Meeks have been very actively involved in working with the Boston Consulting Group, who is contracted under the Recovery Office, to kind of take information we've learned from our needs assessment and from surveys. And then we do have a form where any of your ideas and input can be submitted. And so we really appreciate any ideas and input, but right now we're working on a list, and the list we have some short-term items that we know that we can get out the door, like sustainability grants is a major one, right? And so we're working really hard to get that out the door. We have some subsidy changes to our Hero Relief program that we're trying to get out the door. So those are the big ones that we're trying to get out the door first. And then there's a long list of other ideas. And we should have a finalized list by April 5th that we should be able to share of some of the major ideas. But I think that people are going to be really happy to see the things on that list and some of the work that's gone into it. It's mostly come from the work that's happened over the past couple years. So we've taken everything we've learned from everything and surveys and I'm sure there's room for things that you can think of. So we definitely appreciate any input.
And Debbie, I know that we've sent out the link to provide that feedback before I know I've seen it in weekly email updates, and that we sent it out on our KSDE listserv. Can we make sure that we include that in the follow-up for this meeting too? Because Nikki, what I heard is that it's still helpful for people to be submitting feedback from that form at this phase too. Thank you, Paula, for keeping our eye on some things that we know, or that money is coming, and some things that we don't know yet is exactly what our rules are for spending that money. So those are some pieces that we are excited to learn. Angie, I know that we've referenced the childcare health consultants a couple of times in this meeting, and I know that we've had so much new happen this year. I'm wondering if you can refresh us on what that is and where we're at with that.
This is Angie Sanger with Child Care Aware of Kansas. On our website, there's childcare health consultation information, and any licensed provider can reach out for consultation around health, safety, wellness, COVID mitigation strategies to receive consultation through that process. So Debbie can send some follow-up information in the email on that website if that would be helpful. And then I would just encourage panel members to help us get that information out to licensed childcare programs. Amanda, would you like me to share also? I also wanted to mention the childcare impact grants that just launched on Monday, March 15th. And our request to the panel is just to share that information with licensed childcare programs. The application window is March 15th through April 15th. So if any of you can help us get the information out about those impact grants too for childcare facilities, that would help help us increase that reach. And Debbie will also include that in the follow-up email.
And Angie, what are those impact grants? Like, what can the funds be used for?
They are, there's 2 opportunities for childcare providers to apply for: minor renovations to their childcare facility for COVID mitigation, health and safety, and then any other needs to help them either reopen or stay open to provide services for children and families. And then there's more detail on our website too.
So I think that leads nicely into the second and last question that I had on this topic, which is some brainstorming about how panel members can support the Kansas COVID-19 response. I think that we know that there is going to be just a lot of new information to deliver to both childcare providers and families. And so I think that we know that the more people can be sharing a message, the more likely it is that somebody will be able to see it at a time when things are really busy, whether that's a childcare provider or a family. So I know that our team is continuing to send things on to the KU team to add into the All In for Kansas Kids weekly email newsletters. That continues to be a really helpful place to send information. And if any of you send information to Debbie, she can get that to Mandy Enfield, who pulls that together. But I think that really looking at that with an eye towards, all right, what can we include in our communications? What can we help spread the word about? Our team this week saw the announcement about the emergency rental assistance and thought, gosh, that's a really important piece to be sharing with families of young children to make sure that they know that there are some relief opportunities that are available. How else can panel members support the COVID-19 response? Are there other pieces that we need to be helping spread the word about?
Amanda, this is Deanna. I apologize to all of you for joining late. So I hope what I'm saying doesn't cover something you already discussed or birdwalk. And this is slightly tied to both of your questions.
Yep.
I know in the Part C world across the state, our referrals are down and our numbers are down as a result of COVID. And it's a really big concern that we have so many kids out there we know we're missing. They're either not going to the places that would have, you know, maybe been referring. We've talked a lot with physicians, and those kids, you know, maybe weren't having medical appointments and that kind of thing. And then even in like childcare and all these other settings where kids are. But I know our KDHE, thankfully, our funding, we've just learned will be kept level funding from the Part C grant part, thank goodness. But that is impacting everyone. I know there's a lot of the conversation or some training going around about ASQ and that piece, but I think just from our regular operations, keeping that thought kind of in the forefront with the folks who are seeing the kids first about, don't forget, because we're worrying about so many other things that, you know, making sure if we wonder, because not only does it affect funding and all of, you know, numbers kinds of things, but there's just kids that are not getting services that we're going to see as they enter, you know, they show up as a 4-year-old or whatever, and we've missed them. So I'm not sure how we, if that necessarily, I think it is a COVID issue, but it's not necessarily got funding behind it. But just mentioning that again, that I think we're going to be seeing the fallout from this for a while.
Absolutely. And, Deanna, also Kelly Mark, or I think that Heather had to drop off. Do we have any ideas for good places to send people if we're looking for, resources to share with families about where they can access developmental screenings, or any ideas along those lines?
The information's like on, the KDHE website for that. Tiny K Alliance has a nice little map where you can look, and see. And I think all of us programs, the things we typically do are continuing, to make sure to do that outreach. But even with COVID, sometimes that's difficult. But I do think, if there are some things that maybe to be highlighting that would be useful. And even, in childcare settings, but it's not limited to that. So,
right. Kind of an all hands on deck approach.
Yeah, kind of like, and, the American Academy or the Kansas Academy of Pediatrics and some, those folks. The other thing we've really noticed, if you think about it, the health departments have been so overwhelmed with COVID and now vaccines that they're not necessarily seeing as many kids, or those referrals that we sometimes see coming from our health departments are down as well. So it's across all the systems.
Absolutely.
So
thanks, Deanna. Emily.
Hi. Yeah. So Deanna, to your point, it is crucially important. And as a child care provider, I can tell you I'm seeing the changes that, last spring we were starting to make predictions about language development and, behavioral development. And I know I'm personally seeing things, I had to go out and specifically get new water bottles so that the children would be, sucking rather than tipping back and drinking, so to engage their muscles to make certain signs or certain sounds. I think one of the things to help in this situation is ensuring that, through the training that providers are participating in, is that we have information about what, Part C does and the purpose and, how it benefits us as, professionals in the equation. And so making sure there's a solid understanding of what we're doing and how that plays in. And then also putting verbiage around the fact that in many cases, we're not talking about, this is a tragic situation. We're talking about ensuring that supports are in place for this child, that, we've acknowledged that the work on the front end is hugely important in the long-term success of a child. And so when people hear that, Part C is connected to disabilities, it's not necessarily what we're talking about. We're talking about, needs for support. And so that way then it helps providers know how to work with families and talk with them about why they would be making that referral. And that way then it can kind of speed things up between the understanding. So just making sure that I think there's enough training on what it is and why it's important. It's a resource that I tap into regularly because I used it with my own child. It was part of my previous employment. I, really support it. And so I would look there as one way to facilitate this.
I totally want to make a plug, even one of our PDG applications. Maybe there'll be another shot to apply again, but I know at one point we had done a series of trainings that we got KDHE approved. We called it our Hazel Shriver project because we had money from this lady, wonderful lady that we did, but it was a series of trainings that we did that our special ed folks did specifically for providers to kind of take away some of that fear of some maybe kids that were more involved, but also just stuff on sensory stuff. And here's stuff you can do. and feeding things, and here's what we're working on with language. And those were so well received. And, I think providers want that information. So, coming up with something like that, we did it for quite a while till our money ran out, and it's so valuable. And you think about, that's where kids are for that many hours a day, and our service delivery model is working through routines, and so we need to be in there. So,
well, and one of the things I would also add is, quite often in many situations, a child doesn't even necessarily need to be identified with a diagnosis or an IFSP. Even they don't even necessarily need the IFSP, but the adults in that child's life need those ideas and that support. And sometimes the 45-day wait period, that's a lifetime to a 1-year-old. That can be huge amounts of developmental growth possibility. And so finding ways that providers can have access to information and supports that, maybe we have a kiddo that has a language delay, but it's not actually even diagnosable. And with certain ideas in place, it could be worked on, and the ball could still get rolling for that child, but we could have things in place. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Those strategies, like all the kids benefit from having that. So yeah. That's my opinion.
Thanks, both of you.
It's Jenny to jump in. I just a thought in case it sparks something for anyone else, but listening to you both talk about that, I think something you particularly said, Emily, around having called out that delays might, that there were concerns a year ago as this was all going down. I wonder what opportunities there are now, given where we are with new funding coming in and a year into all of this, to just to your points around, if there's hesitancy around developmental screening or around wanting supports, and we're all in a situation now where our kids and our families went through a year of this to no fault of their own, right? That it might be a moment to grasp in terms of our collective experience of what we've all gone through, and sort of to reemphasize the importance of just all of that sort of grabbing of supports that we have, and assessing where we're at and helping each other kind of get back up to speed. Like there might be a moment here to address some of that you're talking about in terms of should anyone have hesitancy around any of these supports. We're in a different place than we were a year ago. So,
and social emotional, we know I think we have more kids who are probably showing some delays just because of environmental differences. They aren't interacting with peers like they were, or, all those things that we probably have more kids that we need to be doing intervention with. And you're right, some of it could be done in just that environment. Maybe if, providers have some things to kind of throw in and beef it up, those kids may pick up and go ahead and, get what they need. But I know also providers are often really uncomfortable with this. Like, how do I tell a parent that I think that their child is showing some delays and I don't want to, that is something we've done a lot of conversations around, because they're kind of in this awkward place, and as part of that training too. And then if you're kind of doing regular screenings and everybody's doing them, that is one step where it makes it less weird, that there's something, you're saying something's wrong. And so there are lots of things, I think, along that path, like you say, that we could do cross programs, cross all of this, that raise awareness that, hey, it's not a failing if your child is showing some delays, and there's so many things we can do. And
so Deanna, I really appreciate you saying that, because so before I got into early childhood and childcare, my job for over a decade was supporting people with special healthcare needs. That's what I went to college to do. I got a special education degree. I worked all ages, early childhood on up to adulthood, supporting people with various abilities. And over the last few months, I have struggled
with my kids, and I feel like I'm failing them. And sorry. If I have the knowledge that I have, oh my goodness, I am so sorry. This is really unprofessional.
Emily, I think it's really worthwhile for us to all, it's been a really hard year. And I know that we all are, that I certainly know that I have had days where I think that we are all here to support each other and to really recognize that the point that I'm hearing you make is that we can take, if we can know that we've got a whole lot of supports and knowledge and pieces and feel this way, that the importance of supporting each other and attending to social emotional health is something that is not going to magically go away on the awesome day when everybody is vaccinated and ready to go.
And you are one representative voice of thousands and thousands of parents who are having those same. And even without a pandemic, people deal with that, but this has just made it so much harder. So.
This is Cornelia. I was literally talking to my sister this past weekend, and Emily, I said the same exact thing. You know, I have literally spent my entire professional career in social services and can help everybody come up with plans and strategies and whatever, you know, to help their children. And that's what I get paid to do, right? And then I'm in my household and I am frozen. And like, what do I do? And I'm watching my teenager spiral because her senior year is not a senior year and I'm stuck. And what do I do? And it's not a comfortable feeling. And the same thing that you said is, if I'm feeling like this, and this is what I do for a living, you know, and this is what I got my degrees in, and lots of money back to student loans, you know, for all of the education that I received, you know, and teach classes to people on this or whatever, and I'm stuck. You know, imagine how the everyday person who doesn't have the knowledge is, you know, feeling. And it's overwhelming. It's just an overwhelming feeling and an overwhelming time. And as a parent, you do feel like you're failing. You get that feeling. But it really is just taking a moment to realize that you're not alone, you know, and that this is real. And if people are watching this on YouTube, I'm certain if there was a way for them to comment, they would also say that this is real. And I love the fact that, Amanda, we have a panel of people, you know, together where it's okay for us to be human. You know what, we're not expected to be, you know, immune, you know, internally to the struggles that are going on. And I think that's part of why we're on this panel, you know, is because we actually care and want to make the impact. So hugs to you. I get it. Yeah.
Emily, this is Cassandra. I've been a special needs mom now for 17 years, and I still fail daily. My oldest is 19. Over the last year, I've seen him maybe a handful of times because Heart Spring, where he lives, has been on lockdown. And I'll tell you what, this has been the hardest year of my life. And I've had to work with Social Security. I've had to work with Can Care. And I've struggled. There's been days where I've just wanted to throw in the towel and say, I'm done. I don't want to deal with anymore. But I had my 11-year-old that I had to deal with and make sure his needs were met. And we had issues with school. And my husband was going through his own depression. And I was going through mine. And it was tough. And it's hard. I get it. And we need to support each other. There's been so much hate in the world lately, and especially in our district, over should schools reopen, should kids be wearing masks, and it's just awful. And I'm tired of it all. And so don't apologize for breaking down, because I'm there. I'm ready to break down right there with you. This has been tough for a lot of us. And as soon as I found out on February 8th that I could go see my son, I was across town and seeing him because I hadn't seen him for so long. And I hope I never have to go through that again. But I'm still struggling, just the back and forth with my youngest to school. It's hard right now, and I can't wait for school to be over. I'm thankful we had spring break this week, but I know Monday it's going to get rough again. So it's tough. We've got to stick together and get through it together and encourage each other.
I think that's really well said. I really appreciate that that in the midst of a really challenging year, that each of you have joined and have participated and engaged in this panel with the faith and the hope that if we work together and if we bring what we can bring to the table, that together we can move the system forward and move our state forward and support it. So I want to make sure that everybody has a chance to take a walk or eat their lunch or have some relaxation. So I think we're going to zoom through the last couple pieces on our agenda, and I'll put it up on the screen so that we can see. Do we have any requests for future agenda items? If you want to noodle on this and share those with Debbie, you can also feel welcome to do that. I know that she is working with the team at DCF that administers the Kansas Quality Network website for an upcoming meeting and conversation on that piece. Any bright spots or pieces that weren't on the agenda today that you want to share out so that your fellow panel members are aware?
Actually, this is Emily in Olathe. As a
Absolutely.
bright spot, I wanted to really commend the way that Johnson County Child Care Licensing has handled vaccination for child care providers. It was smooth and organized and just so well attended, attended to. And I just really, I feel like, Eldana and her team, they just really need to be recognized for the work that they did on our behalf and how well those events have been put together. My second vaccination, my appointment time was 8 o'clock and I was in and done by 7:47 in the morning. So I just feel like that's a bright spot that needs to be shined.
Absolutely.
I have a bright spot. This is Peggy Kelly. Yesterday, for the first time during our Head Start weekly call, we actually found ourselves talking about post-pandemic aspirations and thoughts. So just to realize that was, a term that we were willing to use, I think is a huge, not that it's happening now, but that we can begin, that we can begin to turn our thoughts to what do we take forward from this that can be good and that we can use better, and what have we learned, and just the fact that we can begin to live differently. At some point, the horizon is getting closer.
I think I'm as excited about that as Lucia is, Peggy.
And I just want to share and call out Emily Barnes. She was on a national panel representing family childcare with the bipartisan policy organization. And I think Linda Smith, who used to be the administrator for children and families under the Obama administration, even said, Emily, you're like a poster child for family childcare. And so I just wanted to call out that our very own Emily was nationally on a panel and did an excellent job of sharing her experience of being a family childcare provider. I was so proud just to see her. That was just so exciting.
Hear, hear. Go Kansas. Well, thanks, everybody.
This is Cassandra.
Absolutely.
Sorry. I just wanted to share the Family Advisory Council has chosen the maternal health to be our next work group in our expansion. And so if everybody could share that, I will get flyers to Debbie if she could share that out with the group. But we are recruiting for that leg of our council, and we are still looking for more members for our childhood group. So if you could continue to share that, I would appreciate it.
Thank you, Cassandra. That's a great reminder that if we want to have a system in Kansas where we're really able to have parent and family voice inform and be a strong part of our system, it's on all of us to help spread the word and recruit and help make that be help make all of our family leadership groups be really strong, and this one in particular.
This is Lori again with KDHE. I just want to say, as always, we have a large audience that talks to a lot of families every single day. So if there is a message that we can forward on for you, if you give me that message, we will make sure that we push it out for you.
I'm going to make a leap here and go. I have a bright spot for people who are looking for a job. We have we have a lot of openings right now. And some of our 2 retirements, I think, came earlier because of COVID and different, things. But we could use help spreading the word, because we have in our Tiny K program, we have a pilot project with KDHE that we'd love to get off the ground, but I need a licensed mental health person. And the person I had can't do it. So I think even just spreading that to people, or, hey, go ahead and finish that degree, or, hey, you could work your way up, but also just networking, because I think all these people that are unemployed due to COVID in other parts of the country, and I think, how do I connect with them? So anyway, if you know anybody looking and they're willing to move, we have opportunities.
Thanks, Deanna. Going once, going twice. All right, everybody. You can see our upcoming meetings via Zoom here on the screen. The Children's Cabinet and Trust Fund is meeting the morning of April 9th, assuming that the legislature does not do anything really unexpected. And then the Early Childhood Stakeholders Group will meet that afternoon. So as a reminder, that's something that is open to anyone to join and attend if they would like to provide input to shape the future of early childhood in Kansas. And then I'll look forward to seeing all of you on Friday, April 16th at 9 a.m., 8:40 if you want to join to have a little bit of social time with your fellow panel members. Thanks for the extra 7 minutes today. I think it was really well worth it. And I so appreciate each one of you. I hope you have a great rest of your Friday and enjoy some peace and quiet this weekend.